Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Barry's Book Reviews. This is episode number 20. And today's book is Mina by Kim Sagwa, translated by Bruce and Juchan Fulton. The Fultons are prolific and well-known translators with long careers. They've translated lots of books and lots of short stories, some of which I've already reviewed on the channel, and more of their translations I'll review in coming episodes. This is the first time we're talking about Kim Sagwa. Mina was originally published in Korean back in 2008. I think it was her debut novel when it was published, and I think it was actually quite controversial when it was published in Korean. I think it caused some controversy when it was released back in 2008. The English translation followed a decade later, so it was published in 2018. It was Kim's first novel to be translated into English. Since then, a couple of years later, she had another book translated, which is also a very interesting piece of work, Be, Book and Me. It was a different translator and a different publisher, but actually covers some sort of similar or adjacent kind of themes and issues. Also very interesting book. I'll try and review that at some point in the future as well. And as far as I know, the only other thing, I think it's the only other thing she has available in English translation, is a short story in this collection, The Future of Silence, fiction by Korean women. And I think all of these stories were again translated by Bruce and Juchan Fulton. And I think this is the only other English translation of Kim Sagwa that I've seen. I might be wrong. Maybe there's some other stories published elsewhere, but I think this is the only other thing I've seen. This story has a fantastic title. I have to confess I haven't read this story yet, but I'll try and get around to reading that sometime soon as well. But the title of the Kim Sagwa story is "It's one of those the more I'm in motion, the weirder it gets days, and it's really blowing my mind." So super interesting title. And like I said, I'll try and get around to reading that sometime soon, because I was a huge fan of both her novels. Be, Book and Me is fantastic, and the book that we're talking about today, Mina, is also fantastic. So Mina is, it's a disturbing story of Korean teenagers. If you've been watching some of the recent K-dramas on Netflix, you'll have seen shocking stories about Korean teenagers, violent stories about Korean teenagers. And if you like those kind of stories, then Mina is certainly a book that you might be interested in. And when it was published, back in 2008, it was part of a trend. And then that trend also, was mirrored about a decade later when lots of those novels were translated into English. And that was a trend for novels which were depicting the troubled lives of Korean school students. And I've reviewed books like this already on the channel. So we have The Impossible Fairy Tale by Han Yu-ju, which covers some kind of similar territory about troubled Korean school kids, troubled Korean teenagers. We also have books like Kim Young-ha as I Hear Your Voice, which again, it's super interesting about adolescents sort of struggling to survive in Seoul specifically. Fantastic books. And also graphic novels as well. Bad Friends by Anko. Again, that's a book which sort of covers this similar difficult territory of transitioning from your young teenage years through adolescence into young adulthood. And so all of these books, they share sort of thematic elements with Mina. And there's other books as well. So books like Hwang Chong-eun's I Will Go On, and I'm sure there's some others that I'm forgetting as well. But all of these books portray young Koreans as having, very difficult, very challenging lives for various reasons. But they see Korean adolescence as this, violent struggle for self-determination, for some kind of self-determination. And Mina might be the most shocking of these books. It was one of the most vicious depictions of being a teenager that I think you can find in Korean fiction, at least the translated books that I've read so far. Where Mina is different from some of these other books, so where it's different from Anko's work, and it's different from, I Hear Your Voice, and it's different from Hwang Chong-eun, is that Mina is about, rich kids, right? So these are kids who are at the upper end of the economic spectrum, and so the pressures they face from family and school and society in general are a bit different, but nevertheless they have these pressures on them. And if you're looking for a K-drama set in a similar environment, then I'd recommend Sky Castle. So there's elements of this book which kind of reminded me of some of the parts, some of the elements of Sky Castle. And Sky Castle is on Netflix, and it's a super fun and engaging watch. So what's the basic story of Mina? Who is Mina, and what problems are her circle of friends dealing with at the beginning of the novel? So the title character, Mina, is a high school student, and she's living in some very unique circumstances. So her father won the lottery, and they now have this very lavish lifestyle. They live in a very expensive, stylish apartment block with all the luxuries of modern life. Everything that you could possibly desire from sort of modern living in Korea. So it's kind of the Korean dream. And everybody around her, they see her as being highly intelligent. She's very pretty, and she has sophisticated intellectual interests. So she's quite highbrow, and she's intelligent, and she has all of these, higher level sort of intellectual things that she's curious and interested in. She's generally well liked and seemingly loved by most of the people around her. At the beginning of the novel, however, her friend Chi-hye commits suicide by leaping from her apartment block. And as a result, Mina sort of falls into this downward spiral. She becomes introverted, she becomes withdrawn, and she's very deeply affected by the death of her friend. However, Mina is not really the central character of the novel. The main character, the protagonist, is actually Mina's deeply disturbed and highly unstable friend, Crystal. And again, like Mina, on outward appearance alone, Crystal seems to be the perfect high school girl. However, she's actually an increasingly violent sociopath, and Crystal's a fascinating character for us to observe in this novel. Why is Crystal so disturbed? I don't want to go into details or tell you what happens, but it's interesting to think about what's happened to Crystal, or what's happening to Crystal, to turn her into the monster that we see in this book, right? And it's interesting to see how this sociopathic nature reveals itself. And when I read this book when it first came out, I seem to remember noticing that there were a couple of places, a couple of people that compared this book to American Psycho, right? To Bret Easton Ellis, late 1980s, I think, novel American Psycho. And the central character in American Psycho is Patrick Bateman. And there are some parallels between the way that character is depicted in American Psycho and the way Crystal is depicted in Mina. Crystal does share things with Patrick Bateman. She projects this, outwardly perfect image from outward appearances. She looks like the perfect, high-achieving Korean high school girl. She's ticking all the boxes of Korean high school girl success. She has this very, perfect, carefully put together image. She's extremely high-achieving academically. She's obsessed with success. She views those around her as weak, as losers, as idiots. She has a fascination with consumer products and brands and pop culture. The novel's packed with these, super interesting and strange and very long, detailed descriptions of Crystal's thoughts on popular culture, on consumer goods, and various aspects of Korea, Korean education, and so on. Super interesting. Also, like Patrick Bateman, she has no empathy for those around her. She doesn't understand how to act appropriately around other people. She's sort of studied other people to learn the appropriate responses in situations. So she's essentially a studied sociopath. Mina was published over 10 years ago at this point, so 2008. And Crystal really does kind of embody some elements of the Hell Chosun idea. She's internalized society's message about what success is, and in attaining this perfect image, she's become, like her name suggests, she's outwardly perfect, but ultimately she's empty and soulless and a monster. And one of the main things that Crystal seems to hate and direct her anger towards is the Korean education system, and this is maybe the main thrust of this novel. And so the education system is a target for a lot of Crystal's anger and for a lot of the novel's anger in general. And at one point, I think it's Crystal states, she says in one of these rants that she goes on about education, the private education system looks down upon the public education system, offering a customized and quality education based on a student's achievement level. It's not a solution, merely a gigantic market that feeds off the broken public school system. The cramped schools make a place for themselves by seizing on the flaws and weaknesses of the public schools, creating a massive market, and so they succeed, but that's it. And she goes on to argue that there's one path for the elite students. There's another path for those high school students who just try to endure this horrible experience until they make it to university. And then you have this, abundance of other students who are just sort of lost. They succumb to the pressures that they're under. They fold under depression, and they sometimes commit suicide, right? We see an example of that in this novel and how it affects people. This is a very, I thought this was a genuinely unsettling piece of work when I first read it. Kim's characters, they feel real, the atmosphere feels real. Crystal is this sort of exaggerated, condensed, heightened example, but there's a sort of authenticity to the way that Crystal's portrayed. The writing is very sharp and vivid. That seems to come through in the translation very clearly. The story is gripping. How is this going to develop between these characters? And it does a very good job of analyzing the Hell Chosun phenomenon, and it does so with a great deal of insight. It's a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. I think Kim's a great writer. Like I said, we'll also try and look at Bee Book and Me sometime soon. Also a fantastic novel. And the last thing I want to say about this book is the cover is fantastic as well. I'm not sure who designed the cover. I checked before, but it doesn't. It just says that the cover is by Gabrielle Wilson and Gallery Stock. I don't know anything about the artist, but it really is a fantastic cover. And I like it. It's very atmospheric, and it does a good job of setting the book up. Kim also has another great cover for her next book. Anyway, it's a fantastic novel. It's Mina by Kim Sagwa, and I highly recommend checking it out. Translated by Bruce and Ju-Chan Fulton. And that was today's book. This was episode 20 of Barry's Book Club. Thanks for watching. Take care.